Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss the Azure Virtual Network. It allows you to build your own private network for communication between the Azure resources. This video is going to be split into two different parts. The first one, we are going to view the Microsoft documentation, understand more about the Azure Virtual Network, where to find information and details about the networking, subnets, architecture, and so on. Then we are going to create an Azure Virtual Network, add a subnet, and test connectivity with a Windows virtual machine. Ready to make the Azure cloud your comfortable zone? Let's get started. First of all, before we get started, I would like to let you know that the Azure Virtual Network itself is free. Okay, so when you create networking, you can create as much as you want. There are, of course, subscription limits. It's not on top of my head, but you can create many networks. And basically, we use the virtual network to allow resources like, for example, VMs or Azure Kubernetes services, or even managed service to be able to communicate to each other. So every resource within Azure needs a private IP address to be able to communicate with the other service. Let's say you have a VM, maybe this is a web server, would like to talk to its backend through the private network. So normally we through the private network. So normally we create a network, and then we assign private IP address, either IPv4 or IPv6, and then they will be able to talk to each other. Of course, optionally, you can also create a public IP address, but any outbound traffic or the outbound traffic is enabled by default. So why would you use the networking? Because again, it's private to you. It's private to your Azure subscription. No other customers is sharing this network. It's like on-premises. You know, when you bring or buy switches and routers and so on, and then connect your servers, it's the same thing. So if you would like to, these are the use cases. If you scroll all the way down here, why we should use Azure Virtual Network, you can see first is communication between Azure resources, right? VMs to VMs, Kubernetes to VMs, Kubernetes to AI services through private link or whatever, SQL databases, and so on. Whatever the use case is. Maybe you have on-premises infrastructure. So in customers, like they having Azure Cloud and also on-premises network, they would also use or communicate with their on-premises network through the what we call site-to-site VPN, express route, or point-to-site VPN. Maybe you want to block certain network traffic, so you would like to filter network traffic through Azure Network Security Group or Azure Firewall, or even third-party like Palo Alto or whatever. Routing the net traffic or integration with other Azure services, like, as I mentioned, AI services is one case, app services, and so on. The managed service doesn't really live within your network, but you can talk to the Azure services through the private link, which also it's a big topic on its own, but I just want to highlight why we should use virtual network. And of course, communication of Azure resources with the internet. So if I want my VM to be able to maybe type www.google.com to go out and find Google or any resource over the internet, we also have to use a virtual network. So without the virtual network, specifically for the core service like VMs or virtual machines, the resources won't be able to communicate. Okay, that's one thing I want to highlight. The other thing is the pricing option. So as I mentioned, there are pricing tier. Again, the service itself is for free, but as soon as you create maybe a virtual network in the same region, then the inbound and outbound traffic is going to be charged per gigabyte. So this is how much you're going to pay per gigabyte. And if it's global VNet peering, which means that you have different virtual networks in different regions, then this is also going to be the charges. And again, every region is different from the other. So some of the other regions might offer less according to the labor tax and so on. So it doesn't, you really need to figure out which region to use. regarding that. Now let's jump into the Azure portal and create a networking. So in order to be able to create network, you can go back to the documentation and find there's a network contributor role, right? So let's create a resource group here. We're gonna call it like, RG dash virtual network dash maybe production. Okay, so this is gonna be my resource groups, and again, choose whatever the closest region to you. So I'm gonna choose West Europe, and then of course we learned that we need to tag the resources like environment equal maybe testing, or we're doing production, right? Prod. Yeah, we call it production. So created by, then you add your team email. So for me, Cloud with Mo. You can add more and more, so cost center and so on. There is no rule here, okay? So I'll just click review and create, and then hit create. So I'll refresh here, just to wait the resource group to show up. As I mentioned, you can either go owner, so I have an owner permission for that user. This is the admin, but you always can assign a specific networking, permissions. So if I go here, I can take a look at the job function role, and then I can just find network contributor. Okay. So if I go down here, network contributor. So let me zoom in. Can take a look here. So you can assign that, so you will be able to manage the networking. You can take a look here at what kind of permissions, like the actions, what are you allowed to and what you're not allowed to. But you can see here the Microsoft Network. You will be able to write, you'll be able to delete network security group, and so on. Okay, so you can check the permissions here, delete firewall, you can delete. So you can check the permissions and always use the minimum permissions as possible. So I don't deal much with, I'm not an administrator, but you can, I'm adding myself as an owner, so I can do everything. But you either can assign network contributor, or even go to the resource group direct, and then assign owner permission to this resource group. Okay. And then you're going to have owner permission on any resource within the resource group if the admin got the owner, for example, or the networking team. Now, what we need to do, so either you find the virtual network here on your favorites, or you can just search for virtual network, or you can type the shortcut VNet. So virtual network is basically we're gonna create the networking. So it uses the RFC standard, like the 1918. So you can pretty much create the classic network. So I will this is just asking me for the control plane or for the resource name itself. So this is unified. So which Azure subscription, which resource group that you're gonna place your network. So we need to select our resource group, which is the RG VNet production. And this is my subscription. You could have more than one subscription. And then give it a name, like maybe VNet dash production. Maybe this is hub network, which means is that I will just do spoke. So hub network is basically the network that will hold the VPNs, your firewall, and so on. And then the spokes is going to hold the applications like VMs, storage, networking, etc., etc. Then I will click next. There are a lot of security features that you can leverage right away. For example, you can encrypt the traffic between, for the private IP address, it's called virtual network encryption. But it will tell you here you need to enable accelerated network. So that's the minimum. So for customers that has highly regulated, requirements, they can encrypt the traffic, the private IP network as well. So that's also possible to do. And then you can learn more. So you can open from that documentation and learn about it. We're gonna talk about the Azure Bastion later, but you can deploy Azure Firewall, DDoS protection. So there are many different security features. Again, that's not part of the the network itself creation, but you can. I just want to let you know that you can enable that, or even enable it later on after the creation. Here, it's gonna ask you to to choose an address space. So the minimum you can use is /12. Or maybe less. No, /12 is the minimum. And the subnet mask, so it will show you here 10.0.0.0/16, and then the available IP address is going to be 65,000 IP address. By default, it's going to create one subnet, so you need to segment or divide this bigger address into smaller subnets. For example, you could have databases, storage, web servers, and so on, and then you have different network traffic rules assigned to these subnets. So that's why you do not just create like a big subnet with the 65,000 address. Okay, so that's not according to the networking best practice. But you can see here also you can add IPv4 or IPv6 subnet if it's required. Again, tags like any other Azure resource, then review and create, and then click create. That's it. You have a networking resources, or you have a virtual network in your Azure subscription. In a matter of seconds, we have successfully deployed the virtual network. Again, you can go back to the virtual network. You will be able to see here, this is your virtual network, and this is your, we can even close that. It will show here the name, which resource group, which location is that network. And yeah, you can just go ahead and open this network for yourself. On the left side here, you will see these are again showing the same details, like which resource groups, what is the location of this network. Again, normally you deploy it the closest to your users or maybe your on-premises network, so always choose the right region for yourself. My preference is just I've created in West Europe, but feel free to use whatever. And then it will show also you here which subscription ID. This is the classic one. And then again, this is the address space that we have selected, 10.0.0.0/16. And then there's one subnet. The default is going to use Azure provided DNS. However, you can switch if you would like to, maybe your VMs to join your on-premises Active Directory domain through the VPN. You can actually go and modify this. So under the network settings here, you can actually go to DNS, and then by default, it will always any resource or any VM will use the Azure DNS unless you change it to your custom DNS and then add your IP address. Okay, so 192.168.2.33. Maybe this is my DNS server on-prem. So now if I want to join the Active Directory on-prem, I can do that as well from here. Okay, there are many different scenarios that you can use. There is private DNS from Azure. There's a lot of stuff. Network is a big topic, but I just wanted to let you know as a quick one here, or explain this tab for you. Now, you have the option also to add another address space with different subnets. You can add another one. That's completely fine. It needs to be unique. So remember, if you are going to connect these networks with each other, like this address space needs to be unique. So if you are building site-to-site VPN with on-prem, you cannot have the same network here. Azure doesn't support overlapping. It will break. If you are going to build peering, which means is that two virtual network, you want them to communicate to each other. Also, they need to be unique. Okay, so within the subscription or different subscription, the address space must be unique. Overlapping, again, is not supported. Now, this is the address space. So let's move to the subnets. So by default, you can see there are 5 IP addresses going to be reserved for Azure. That's the loopback and so on. We're going to see it in a moment from the documentation, but you can see by default it will create a /24 subnet. However, you can use larger ones. It depends on your use case. There is no kind of hard rule here. But to create a subnet, normally you click on the plus bottom here and then select the subnet type. In the old school, if you're creating firewall, you need to give it a specific name like this, Azure Firewall Subnet. But Microsoft made it easy now, is that if you're creating for Azure Firewall, then it will automatically type that name for you. If you are going to create a virtual network gateway or VPN gateway, then you can also, you don't need to manually name that, it will automatically pick that name for you. If it's a regular subnet for VMs, then maybe it will allow you to select the name. Let's say this is going to be web servers dash subnet. And here, if you have more than one address space, in our case we just have one, so we're going to select it. And then here it's going to tell you, hey, these are the size. As I mentioned, it's 256/24, but it will take 5 IP address from you. So let's use maybe a larger subnet. And I would like to highlight here or stress on something. I saw many customers when they are creating Kubernetes, for example, and integrating with like with Azure, they use smaller subnets, and then what happens is they run out of IP address. So when they trigger the auto scaling, because they use a smaller subnet, then it triggers a problem for them. Okay, so remember to I think it's not alright. Tier 2, and then click on add. So this will give me like a 500 and something, but remember it will take, like if I do it again, sorry, it will take 5 IP address from here. Okay, so 512, that's supposed to be according to the subnet or subnetting. But when you create this, as you can see, it took 5 IP address from the subnet. So if I go back here to the documentation and then take a look here at the the reserved address space. So you can see here what this is the Q&A for Azure Virtual Network. If I scroll all the way down, you will see that these are the IP addresses that's going to be taken from you. The multicast one, also the broadcasts, loopback, link local, and of course one reserved for the Azure DNS. Okay. By default, the subnets have a way to go through the internet, but you can use also public IP or netting, create a network, or even take the internet through the firewall, Azure firewall, or third party. That's up to you. But I just want to let you know that you don't need to configure a public IP address for your resources to go out, because the subnet is routed by default, and we see that from the routes as well. So let's create a virtual machine, and then I will come back again as soon as I finish. Again, I'm not targeting the virtual machine here, but I just want to show you quickly. I will create a virtual machine, choose the VNet VM01. You need, when you're creating resources, it has to be in the same region, otherwise you won't be able to see the network. So I don't need any availability zones, and I'm gonna use a standard BIOS, and then I will use Azure Edition, and then use the username and password. Notice here that it will configure inbound roles, which means is that I'm allowing RDP or remote desktop, which is the port is 3389. If you're using Linux machine, then you're gonna allow SSH. If you're gonna create it for web server, then it depends on the if you want to access the website over HTTP or HTTPS. It's up to you. Again, this is configurable. We will talk about the network security groups, but I just would like to highlight this. Let me just select smaller disk here. Operating system is 27 gigabyte by default. There we go. So we are selecting our virtual network, like VNet. So here, like, normally the virtual machine will check the prerequisites if there's network. If not, then it will create, like, as you can see, it's saying here new virtual network. But we have one already created, VNet prod spoke. So I'm gonna select this, and then you can create new subnet, or so be careful when you're creating this or selecting the existing one. So for our case, we're gonna select from this subnet, so web server subnet. And as I mentioned, optionally you can connect to that, maybe, or route the traffic through the public IP, or even I can choose none. It will create a basic network security group, which is basically a basic firewall for inbound and outbound traffic. And then it will allow the ports 3389. Again, we'll talk about the creation, but not for now. So I'm just gonna click on next. I'm not interested in monitoring now. Extensions, that's fine. Review and create. Then click create. Okay, we have successfully created the virtual network, the VM, sorry. We can just go to the resource and click on the VM itself, or even search for virtual machines. Microsoft like to do things many different ways, okay? Or even we can go from the resource groups. Select my resource, RG VNet production. Then I will see my virtual network and my VM here. So I'll click on my VM. As you can see, the status of this VM is running. It's in West Europe. Again, from the left side is going to give you the details about the resource location, like which virtual network, the status, which region, and then which Azure subscription. On the other side here, it's going to show you operating system, so which we have chosen Windows Server 2025 Azure Edition, the virtual machine SQ, which we'll talk about this on a different video, and then which virtual network / subnet. And you can see here, because we didn't specify public IP address, that's optional. You can see that there is a private IP address 10.0.2.4, so it was taken from that subnet. So we can connect to this VM, but I didn't specify a public IP. I don't want to go for that for now, but I just would like to highlight here from the networking side. If I go under the network settings, which is the virtual network interface of that VM, we can see here we have a network, and then it's showing you here the private IP address. There is no public IP address. You can also configure a public IP address if you want to connect to that VM. Or if you have a site-to-site VPN or express route, you can also connect through the private IP address. You don't need to assign public IP address at all. But I don't have a VPN, so we have to configure this, but this is going to be on the next video. And then as you can see, there's an inbound role created, which is allowing remote desktop. So the port is 3389 and then any to any. So the source is any and the destination is any, which is absolutely not secured, okay? And then there's outbound roles, which allowing the VNet outbound, allowing traffic between virtual network, and then allowing internet to allowing the VM to access the internet. So as I mentioned, the routes is here is is not restricting the the rules, or it's the subnet, or is inheriting from the subnet settings. So by default they can access the internet. If I go all the way down to operations, if I remember correctly, let me just expand this. Okay, so if we click, sorry, things are changed, but if I click on network settings and I click on the actual network interface, I can also view the routes. Okay, so I can expand all the way here and see the effective routes. And then I can see there is a route. So basically Azure, or there is automatic or system routes assigned from Azure. You can change that through routes, but the default one you can see here, that there is the default or the system routes are 0.0.0/0 goes, or the next hop is the internet. So the VM can talk to the internet directly by default, but you can modify that through custom routes and override the system routes from Azure, and then maybe let the internet go through the virtual network appliance or NVA to monitor the outbound traffic. That's the majority of the enterprise does that. But I just wanted to highlight that these are the default routes, and you can see here user-defined routes. There is no user-defined routes assigned. So if I go back again here into the virtual network, into the resource group, we can see we have a virtual machine, a VM, and then a network interface, what we have seen so far, and then the network desk. And here we can see also the network security group assigned to that network interface. So you can see again, this is the firewall. I'm not going to talk about this. I don't want to ever complicate the video, but again, this is the inbound and outbound rules applied to that network interface only, which is not the best way to manage or the best practice. So you can see it's associated with one network interface. If I click on the virtual network, click on my VMs again, I can also click directly here, and then it will take me directly again to my virtual network. And then I can see my connected network interface. So if I click here on connected devices, I will be able to see the name of the network interface and then the IP address and which subnet is associated to that network interface. So 10.0.2.4, okay? And then if I go back to the overview page, I can actually click on the topology. So again, remember, this is what we discussed, the information about the virtual network. I can click on topology, and then I will be able to see my infrastructure here, what it looks like. So in some other customers, this is huge, okay? But you can see here, I have a virtual network called prod, and then it's drawing a nice picture for me. There is default subnets, has no resources, and there is a web server subnet, which has a network interface and a virtual machine and network security group assigned to that network interface. And you can see there is a resource here called or the private IP address. If I click here, I will be able to see this is the private IP address of my network interface. So I can see here it's 10.2.4, and the DHCP is basically Azure. So it's getting the IP address from that subnet to 10.0.2.4. Okay. So if I go back here, focus, I want you to focus to my virtual network, and then select my virtual network again, subnets, open the subnet. So I can see here 10.0.2.0/23. So the connected device is taking from that subnet is 4. So this is the host IP address, or the my server IP address basically. There is one cool feature here, is that Azure Virtual Network is regional. It's deployed in all availability zones, and this is one biggest advantage over AWS, is that in AWS you have to select your availability zone, and if you're changing your VM or your Amazon EC2 from one subnet to the other, you have to change the IP address. Fortunately, in Azure, it's deployed on all availability zones, so you don't really need to worry about which availability zone. If you would like to move it from availability zone 1 to 2 or 3, that's completely fine. The IP address won't change. Okay, so you don't really need to assign, and you have seen when you create subnets in AWS, you have to choose an availability zone. But in Azure, you just create the zone, and it will be the subnet, and it will be available on all zones, which is a huge advantage. I will also point you to some documentation. However, this is just the introduction. I don't want to get into the architecture and the hub and spoke topology that we were talking about. There is also where to assign the actual network security group or the firewall. Is it the VM network interface or the subnet level, and what advantage? We will talk about all of this, but I just like this is just an introduction about what is Azure Virtual Network and how it works. But I would highly recommend to go through the documentation and then go and look at what is virtual network, why we are using it, what are the limits, and so on. Okay, so the limits here, you can take a look at the networking limits, and then by default you can create per subscription 1000 virtual network. Why would you do that? Because you might have a hub and spoke topology, you might have production and testing, you might have a disaster recovery network, you might have different scenarios. There are many different scenarios that you might think of, but the maximum virtual network that you can create is 1000, and the maximum subnets that you can create within the virtual network is 3000 subnets, which is a huge number. And Microsoft always recommend to create different virtual network. Don't rely on a single virtual network, because you might run out of IP address and then you need to recreate the whole network again because you didn't properly calculate the total IP address that you might need in the future. So maybe right now you are a small environment, but later on you might need extra IP address, which also I've seen it a lot. So plan your IP address and your subnetting very, very well. I hope this video was useful for you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.